Hello and welcome back to another video here on Beach's Scaly Beast. If it's your first time here, my name is Luke. Welcome to the channel. Do me a favor and hit subscribe down below. And anyway guys, we're here to talk about my favorite lizard in the world, the humble old Gillens monitor. Now I want to do a video where essentially it's a bit of an ultimate guide to gilleni and their care. Now that being said, it's just going to be off my sort of my keeping, you know, what I've actually done in the past, what's worked for me, how I set up my animals, how I look after my babies, how I have experienced these guys in their natural environment, also the kind of habitat and things that they come from. I just want it to be kind of like a little bit of an all-over guide of these particular animals that I've spent a fair bit of time and a fair bit of money researching, seeing in the wild, my kind of understanding of the lizards in captivity and what I actually think of them. So I've been luckily keeping these guys for about 8 or 9 years, thereabouts at the moment now, and they quickly turned into one of my favorite lizards to have here in Australia. Now, I've always been a fan of goannas in general, but coming in from, you know, smaller apartments, you know, having a normal kind of garage and stuff like that, it wasn't always feasible for me to have a large animal. You know, they cost a lot to feed, they cost a lot to heat, but I love the attitude of goannas, and I like having like things like this essentially in a very small package where they are an awesome little representative of the varanid group of varanus. And yeah, like this is essentially an adult gilleni, so a small animal. This one's probably got a little bit more growing to do, but that being said, it's about it. So you kind of got an animal that's essentially 30 odd centimeters tip to tail, so to speak. This particular one has got a belly full of egg at the moment, just because I gave him a little bit of a treat this morning. But this is essentially what we're looking at. Varanus gilleni, the Pygmy Mulga Monitor, a beautiful little species that lives out in arid Australia, predominantly in your kind of mulga country, as well as a bit of like dry eucalypts and things like that. Absolutely stunning little species. This particular one is very grey in appearance. It doesn't have really good examples of bands, but quite often they'll have, as you'll see in the future videos here, thick kind of bands and things across the back, depending on where they come from. But this particular animal is a stunning little representative of his group. Now, what we're going to do first is we're going to actually dive in and look at some kind of literature that you could go and have a look at, or, you know, if you want to kind of find out some more information that's not just Google or, you know, other keepers like myself and their kind of keeping and stuff like that that's, you know, been put out there on the internet, we can essentially look at some literature. Now, some books that I'm going to recommend here may not actually be in production anymore, but there might be some that you might be able to pick up secondhand and things like that. Now, a particular book that I would highly recommend for anybody into dwarf monitors or any Australian monitors in general is A Guide to Australian Monitors in Captivity by Dr. Danny Brown. This book is absolutely fantastic, and luckily enough for everybody, he has done a re-release of this book. So that one's out of print, but essentially you can buy pretty much the same book, a few little tweaks here and there in the second edition here. So this will go through all your keeping, your, you know, heating requirements, what he kind of recommends as far as like cage sizes and things go. There's some things in there that, you know, you take with a grain of salt, and you might tweak some things up yourself and be able to make something different of it. But it's definitely a great book as far as a base book goes. Now, if you did want something that's a little bit more fancy, maybe goes into your habitat and things a little bit more, I would highly recommend, if you can get this book, grab it. So this is Australian Monitors by Gunther Schmieder. This is the hardcover here. So this is definitely out of print. Unfortunately, Gunther is no longer with us. But that being said, it is a fantastic book, and I think you might still be able to get the paperback magazine custom printed. I'm not 100% sure, but if you can get this is essentially the same book, but it's kind of like in a bit of a more of a magazine type feel. But in these books, you're going to get like great shots of the animals in the wild, habitats, all sorts of things here. So I'll just flick open a particular page. I think we've landed on a Scalaris. but you're going to get highly detailed images, awesome photography of particular species, Australian species, out in the field. Now, there are some other books as well that I would recommend. I'm pretty sure this one's still getting made if I'm not mistaken, but the Australian Lizards, this is by Mike Swan. Fantastic book. Again, it's probably a bit of an overview book, so it'll have details in there on particular species, but you're kind of getting like a page. You're not getting kind of like a highly detailed, report on somebody's keeping experiences over, 5+ years or something like that. So just take that into consideration. But all of these books are absolutely fantastic, and I would recommend that if anybody can, I would go to books first. Obviously there's some awesome information out there on the internet to get as well, but it's great to have something like this to reference back to. It's kind of really important, when you're keeping an animal long term. And you know what, not everybody's like me. I love books, so I might be a little bit biased towards that. Okay, now that being said, where do these guys come from and what kind of environments do they like to live in? Well, luckily enough, I've done now 3 or 4 trips into arid Australia to see where these guys are from. I've failed seeing them a couple of times, but that being said, I have had the opportunity now to see 5 wild gilleni in total. So my first one was actually on a Northern Territory trip, which we were supposed to be right up the top end, but had to come south because of weather. And that, luckily enough, ended up with me being able to get my first wild gilleni, thanks to Luke Youngins, and I was also with Tyson up there as well. And luckily Tyson actually brought some meters, some UVB meters and some thermometer guns and stuff like that, so we'll be able to get into some of those temperatures a little bit later on. So yeah, these guys live in essentially areas where there is dry bark that they can peel into, or hollows and things like that. They like to be able to wedge themselves into tight cracks and live in amongst the trees. These guys are very, very arboreal. If you've ever seen them run on the ground, they're not exactly the most exciting lizard to run on the ground. There's definitely species out there that are a bit more accustomed to that. These guys are meant for climbing. They are seriously meant for climbing, quite arboreal little lizards. So essentially these guys live in amongst dry eucalypts, dry mulga country, anywhere that you can kind of think about that really, really low humidity, dry bark. So predominantly the inside of the country where it is super arid, you're pretty much going to find these guys. They've got a pretty wide distribution, but they are kind of limited into those arid ranges, ranging essentially from about mid of the Northern Territory down to quite low in South Australia, as we found. So they are quite far down South Australia as well, and they kind of go straight over to the east side until they get to the desert there, and they kind of get pushed back, and then they do venture over into WA as well. So what you will notice as far as their habitat goes, as I kind of throw images and clips and things like that up over me talking here, is essentially they do have a little bit of a variety in their habitat, and it was really great to be able to kind of actually take some data from one particular time up in the Northern Territory to actually see how hot some of these areas were getting, as well as the UVI that was present in that particular area. Keep in mind that this was about 1 p.m, 2 p.m. in the middle of a day, and it was like March, beginning of March, very beginning of March, or late February from memory, where, you know, summer was pretty much just coming to an end. So it might be like absolute peak sort of like temperatures and UVI is what you get into that season. But that being said, take into consideration that whenever, you know, somebody gives you data from the field, if it's just like what I'm giving you, it's a snapshot. It's not like the full year's sort of, you know, what you're going to get in a full year as far as the animal's concerned. It is literally just that blink in time of how you saw that animal, temperatures, the UVI, all that sort of stuff. Is just that tiny little snapshot. So take with that a grain of salt, ramp things up, ramp things down from there. Time to say goodbye.
Alright fellas, beers on me.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take some readings of some certain stuff. Surface temperature of the sand, 72 degrees. The surface temp of this tree in the shade. .3. Right. Surface temperature of the tree in the sun. 51.8. I want to find a little hollow or something as well, just so I've shoved the temp gun down there and see if I can see any sort of like different changes in temperatures. Let's just even take this tree for example, which would be the perfect tree for me to take home right now. So inside is 48, outside is 57. I reckon if you were to go around into something like this even, the inside of there is still 47. But I dare say a lot of these gilleni are probably using a lot of these gums and acacia and stuff to actually get right into the bark, deep into the bark, like not just sitting near the surface sort of thing. This little hole here. So even that's 43. So it is bloody hot out here. Obviously the gilleni wasn't found in this exact tree, but it's just to try to give us a little bit of idea of the environment that they're coming into. Yeah, it is sweltering. Bloody hot. So Tyson's actually brought his solar meter over here as well, just to see what sort of readings we get. 11.8 there, 12.2 thereabouts. If we go over to here and a bit more dappled light, it's so hard to pick up on camera. Yeah, anywhere between 6 to 10 thereabouts. If we go like under here for example, in the shade, 1.3, 1.4. That's unreal. Tyson's just corrected me, I was holding on the piss, so he's getting a reading of 13.1 at the highest there, so yeah, you can imagine what that's doing.
So I got 45 degrees surface temp, about 40 degree air temp, so there's not too much difference in air temp. Not too much difference in air temp, but there is a difference in surface temp, obviously.
So what you will notice from a lot of these clips that I'm actually giving you here is the fact that these guys are coming from areas where essentially it's quite sparse, there's lots of trees, there's not really like big rocks or anything like that. You might get a few termite mounds and stuff, but you're not really kind of getting like those big rock shelves like you would for other goannas and stuff like that, like potentially Tristis or, you know, Kimberley rocks or, you know, Kingorum or anything like that. They're not really kind of related to that sort of stuff the same as what other animals are. These guys are really want to be in these hollows, in these sorts of like loose bark sort of areas as well. So take that into consideration when you're kind of deciding what sort of vivarium you like.
This is like stop number 4, I think, for Gillens in a different area. Definitely looks very much like where you'd expect to find them here. These trees are just perfect, but no Gillens yet. There is definitely something living in these trees. There's all sorts of poop all over these trees. It could just be birds, but man, definitely reminds me of some of the drippy gilleni scat that I get at home. Come on.
Fuck yeah!
Found one!
Fucking found one, bro! Oh, dude! Dude, come this way, come around this way.
Right it.
Are He's just sitting perfectly. Check this out. Oh man, I've made my fucking day. Look, his head's out. Oi, come around this way. Check this out. Slow, 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 slow. Look, 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 look.
Holy fucking shitballs.
Get fucked. Hell yeah. Oh, that's made my fucking day.
Fuck yeah.
Out. Check that out.
So I just spotted a little second one that's up in this tree too.
Look at that. I was tapping on the branch, I could hear him running around in there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's made my day.
Yeah.
This is the scrub that they live in, just so you know. Hell yeah.
Second one's just up in here. Oh my god, we end up getting a pair in this tree. Look at the colours on them. These things are absolutely smoking. I don't care what anybody says. These are the best looking gilleni I have ever seen. And to be able to see these little suckers in person. Look at the banding on the girl. I'm losing my shit, man. I'm losing my shit. I don't care what anybody says. I'll swear, I'll do whatever. This is just incredible. Look at that lizard. Christ almighty.
Mate, bucket list ticked, Lukey, ticked. Oh, you fucking good thing.
Ready?
Yep, put them on.
Bit of a release. Whoop, where'd she go?
Into the bottom of the hole.
There you go, mate. Whoop, go into your tree.
Don't go on the ground, go back into the tree.
What the heck? Alright, so tried to put the little gilleni in the tree. He just legged it into this little burrow. Oh man. I can already see her. There she is. See you, little lady. Look at that. Look at that. I'm shaking. Absolutely shaking. Alright, so I'm not even kidding. I'm absolutely brimming with excitement. We're going to see if we can find another one or two. It is cooking out here. Like, it's not even the hottest day that there's going to be on this trip, but because there was some rain, what, 2 days ago you had rain?
Yeah, about 3 days.
3 days. The humidity's kicked up. It actually feels steamy. Like, it feels proper steamy. A pair of Gillens. A pair of Gillens. The best looking Gillens. Oh man. This is amazing. This is amazing habitat. It's amazing lizards. To find them, like, that was like the biggest thing. You always know, you never know what you're gonna get. Sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you won't. That's okay. That's herping. But to find two, man, ecstatic is an understatement.
Stick fell down.
See, this is what I always imagined Gillen's habitat to be, and it clearly is, right? Like, the last one that I got to see was in just stuff that I was just like, this just doesn't look right. This does look right.
Just goes to show they can range over different territories, and they adapt really well to what's around them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you think about it, they got a big range. There's going to be a lot of stuff in that range. We just played the ultimate game of cat and mouse and just waited this little guy out until he popped his head out of the hole. And unfortunately for him, he's going to be on camera, but that's okay. We're going to pop him back in the tree once we're done. Looks like a little boy. Got a couple of good hemipenal bulges there. But man, these little Gillens, man, these are the best looking Gillens I've ever seen. I don't get to see a lot of them in the wild, but even from captive populations, they do not look this good. I don't care what anybody says. The yellows and stuff in this lizard are that vibrant. He is that good. Bro.
How good.
Oh, I have to pay it to this legend. He's the one that invited me down here. He's never seen them either, but man, once we said this is like a target.
I knew they were here.
He doesn't kid around, man. Doesn't kid around. If he wants to find a lizard, he'll find a lizard.
Have a look at the purple in it.
Yeah, it's like
So it's
burgundy
beanies of
purple.
on the yellow. That is sick.
That is a hot lizard. Honestly too, guys, this camera is not doing this justice. I'll try to flip it around so we can give this animal the justice that it deserves. That is arguably my favourite lizard in the world by far. And to have the pleasure to be able to come down here with a good mate who nerds out over this sort of stuff just like I do, and see these little guys in the wild for ourselves. His first time seeing a wild Gillens, luckily enough my second time. But man, those colours. Don't hurt you. Here you go. See you, buddy.
Come out the outside.
It ain't no thing to do my thing, it's what I did the best. I copped that crib and bought 2 chains and then I hid the rest. And it's okay to do your thing, but just don't do the most. I put my friends in that old Benz and took that to the coast. It ain't no thing to do my thing, it's what I do the best. I fill my mattress, pay my taxes, then I blew the rest. And it's okay to do your thing, but just don't do the least. I quit my boss and cooked that sauce and fed that to the streets. Slide in the bed like a wet flow, already fried from the get-go. Alligators look like gecko, everything I do they echo. Big facts, my bank on big man, my drip too wet, that spit can. Yo bitch swap me like Q-tips, hold that shit there like dip can. No rehearse, need no reverb, hold your lip, don't say 3 words. Quick trip to get that lick, broad tree fur if you prefer. Quick ride, no time, I'm in there. She clockwise, real good skincare. No TikTok for that caca, they know that love don't live there. I can't roll dice on your plan, Red Rover, I don't hold hands. Get fortune.
Not gonna believe it, but I just came up with a little fella. Look at this little guy. Only a young one. Slightly different location to where we just were in the last section there. Not too far, but man, they're here. I don't care what anybody says. They're here. Look at that. Oh, he's having a chew. He's having a good chew. Go for it, little fella. I don't even care, mate. You deserve it. I'm the big idiot that just found ya. Oh. Mate, this trip, it's a short trip and it's a dream come true for Gil and I deserve every mouthful, don't you worry. I definitely deserve the mouthfuls. Absolutely kidding me. What a gorgeous little specimen, hey? That is stunning. I cannot believe it. Late too, real light. Anyway, I'm going to let this guy go back where I got him. We'll go find some nobbies. Bro, this guy's savage. He's having another tromp. He's tearing me up. He's just going, you know what, you got me, I'm going to take flesh. I'm going to take proper flesh. Righty, mate. Go back in your little wedge there. See you, buddy. Thank you.
So what I will start with here is essentially adult care, because to start with one of these animals, you're essentially going to probably start with something that's a little bit bigger than a hatchling, and we will touch on baby care in the future in this video as well. But essentially what you want to talk about first is your adult care or subadult care, where you're kind of going to end your terrarium design or your vivarium design. What I've kind of settled on for the time being is some of these Reptile 1 vivariums. These guys that I'm using with the Gilleni currently are 90 centimeters long, 120 centimeters tall, and 60 centimeters deep front to back. These are either housing a pair or a trio currently. That being said, there's no reason you couldn't go bigger than this if you wanted to, because as I've seen in the bush, these guys are well and truly capable of climbing higher than my ceiling is currently. So my ceiling, I think, is 9 or 10 foot at the moment. These guys can climb a lot more than that. One day I will probably get to my dream Gilleni setup when I get rid of most other things, or I have enough space and time and money. But I would love to do something that is essentially floor to ceiling, whether it's in this building or the next. But at the same time, you know, dreams are free, so we'll get there one day. But for now, essentially that 4 foot of height seems adequate enough to keep these guys happy in captivity. I'm sure you can do more than that, and I'd love to see enclosures that do more than that for this particular species. In these enclosures, you'll be able to see that I'm actually using habitat images in the back rather than doing things like false rock walls or anything like that. That is for 2 reasons. A, I can keep it really clean. B, it gives something aesthetic for myself and the animals to actually look at. C, it's from the actual environments that these guys are found in. So to me, I'm kind of trying to bring their home to them, even though they've never seen it because they're captive. But that being said, it's trying to also replicate that aesthetic for myself. The other thing too is I try to keep my enclosures reasonably simple. I'm not kind of maxing them out as far as like usable space. So some people might prefer to actually use more rock walls, more hollows, that sort of stuff. That's perfectly fine if you want to go that route. I don't disagree with it. What I found is in the wild, from some of those snapshots that I've seen, is that animals are essentially got like a home base, a home log that they might use as their base, where essentially that's where they're kind of coming out of, they'll forage from, and they might venture to some other logs and stuff here and there, but that's kind of like their safe spot. They're kind of like hollow. And what I've noticed from having multiple cages of gilleni, where I think I've got 4 main cages of gilleni now, they have a log that they like 100% spend 95% of their time in, as if they're going to sit in one log, they're going to sit in that log. It might not be because of heat, it might not be because of where it is, it might just be like a security thing where they're nice, tight fitting hollow logs, and they seem to really, really like the tighter, the better. They want to be secure, they want to feel like they've got that wood on all sides of them and they can't be pulled out. Now, even to get that little guy out of that log over there, I have to use a stick to kind of try to poke him out of there and encourage him out. It is very rare that I can get my gilleni out of a log unless they're already out of a log, or I have to really kind of like chase them down and poke them out and kind of play around with them a little bit to be able to get them out of these types of habitats. I do offer my gilleni water. I do think that they might use it occasionally. I don't see it often at all. In my 8 or 9 years of keeping gilleni now, I think I've seen gilleni drink out of a bowl a couple of times. So for me, it's probably more so just the fact of let them have it if they've got it. But at the same time, I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I'd rather be safe than not. If they want to have a drink, I'd rather them have the option to be able to drink whenever they want to drink, rather than me not offer it and just rely on the fact that they've got hydrated food going in there and that's enough for them. So I'm just trying to cover my bases as far as water goes. You can see in my enclosures that I've essentially got red sand in all of them. I don't think red sand's the be all and end all. For me, it's more of an aesthetic thing. That's just a way for me to kind of keep things a bit more natural to what I've found in their environment. That being said, sand's pretty easy to clean, it's easy to sift. I actually use a fish net to sift my sand because I find that catches all the little tiny particles and stuff that are in there, so it keeps your sand fresher for way longer. And I do recommend replacing that every now and then as well. If you think that the sand's become too soiled, then chances are it is soiled and you should replace it. I do try to add in other climbing opportunities apart from just hollow logs. I try to put in other bits of bark, other sticks, that sort of stuff, so if they do want to kind of muck around with it, then essentially they've got other things that they can kind of play around on. And it's good to change these things up every now and then. Something I do from time to time too is I actually offer fresh gum browse and things in there as well. So I try to actually take cuttings from the bush, put them in there, and give them some more enrichment, just something to smell, something to freshen up the enclosure for a little bit. Once the gums dry up and they turn into leaf litter, then they become part of the floor ecosystem until I end up getting them out and sifting them out. And then usually I replace the logs, every now and then when I think about it. I haven't done it in a little while, admittingly, but that being said, it's a good thing to be able to just offer a little bit more enrichment for the animals themselves. As far as UVB goes, I like to make sure that all of my goannas are kept under UVB. Like 10 odd years ago, it probably wasn't an everyday occurrence that every single monitor keeper had UVB above their goannas, but it makes sense, right? They're a day active lizard that basks in the sun for its warmth, so it makes sense to be able to provide these guys the opportunity to day bask. I like to try to use some pretty high output UVB tubes, so I always refer to T5s as a good basis, and I like to have at least a 10% at minimum. 12% or a 14% is probably a little bit more accurate to what we want to actually give them to represent those really harsh desert conditions. Something that I do with my UVB tubes though is I have them on a ramp up and ramp down schedule, as well as my daylights, as well as my heat lights. So for myself, I actually run 3 different time schedules for my lighting, where I essentially have my daylights come on first. So essentially it's not providing warmth, it's just providing light. So I use LEDs for this. And you could use multiple different types of LEDs, but I just try to find something that's kind of in that 6500 Kelvin range. I like to use downlights because they're cheap, they do the job, and they're nice and bright. So I use my downlights to come on first in the morning. Then after that, my heat will come on. So I use incandescent heat lights for these guys. For a time period there, I did use deep heat projectors, but I don't recommend those. And There's various reasons why, but I use incandescent daylights now. And then from there, after that light turns on, then my UVB light will turn on. Then after that, my UVB light will turn off. My daylight, my heat will turn off, and then my daylights will turn off at the end of the day too. Now, this does kind of ramp up and down for all of these throughout the year, because I actually have all of these enclosures automated on a grid connect system. But basically, kind of like my peak summer period, my daylights will be on for about 14 hours. My heat lights will generally be on for about 10 hours, and my UVB will be on for 8 to 6 hours, depending on the time of year, depending if we're trying to like really pump a lot of the animals with a lot of UVB and stuff like that. And we'll ramp down throughout the year too, where essentially now that we're starting to edge towards winter, we're in probably about middle of autumn now. Those are all starting to ramp down a little bit, which is a good thing for the animals, because it starts slowing them down. They're not eating so much, and they're not kind of running their metabolism that high. Come the middle of winter, I'll probably find that my daylights will only be on for about 10 hours. My heat lights will probably only be on for about 6 hours, and my UV globe will probably be on for about 4 hours. And then come the middle of winter, where I actually cool them down completely, I will turn the heat off to them completely. I will leave the UVB, I will leave the daylights on, but I will not have the heat light on for probably about a month to a month and a half, where they get zero heat whatsoever. What everyone doesn't realize is that the desert gets really, really cold, so they don't have to have that period where they're super, super warm. And when you're kind of replicating that in a building in the coastal regions of Sydney, essentially, is that it is very mild and temperate in here. So it's not going to be nearly as what they're exposed to outdoors. So they will be perfectly fine with my indoor conditions inside this building, with not having heat lights on for about 6 weeks. As far as diet's concerned, I do try to offer my animals a varied diet. That being said, it is predominantly insects. So we're talking things like crickets, cockroaches, and also grasshoppers if they're available. Occasionally I do try to offer them things like some occasional mealworms or a spider from around the house, or something like that, which they go absolutely nuts for spiders. I think these guys are probably spider specialists in the wild, to be quite frank, with the amount of spiders that are in the arid country. But yeah, predominantly those sorts of bugs. I don't really find that they take to mealworms or any sorts of grubs or anything like that too easily. They do prefer kind of like a fast moving prey. So your crickets, your cockroaches, your grasshoppers, your spiders, that sort of stuff, they tend to be what they kind of go after. So the other portion of their diet that I tend to make up is other things such as different types of mince. And I generally, when I do minces, I actually mix them in with other things. So I'll either use kangaroo or turkey mince, because they tend to be the most lean. I will often mix them in with things like calcium and vitamin powders, as well as dried crickets and dried bugs, or even like Wombaroo insectivore mix, for example, just to kind of actually add a little bit more like insect protein and stuff to the mix. So those are kind of like a little bit of a loafy type option that you can make up and freeze and occasionally give your animals. That's something that I do on, if I'm doing kind of like a fortnightly basis, I'd probably feed that to them like once a fortnight, if that, to be honest. It's predominantly your bugs. Occasionally as well, I will give them a little bit of scrambled egg. I'm probably going to be more likely to do scrambled egg than I'm going to do the mince, just for convenience factors, but also the fact that that's a good little kind of protein and fat hit for them. And I don't try to overdo that either. It's kind of like, a once a fortnight, maybe, kind of like a couple of times a month sort of thing is a bit of a treat. Or if a female, for example, has laid eggs, then potentially I might give those girls a little bit more of that sort of stuff, just to try to bulk them up a little bit again and just try to replenish those fat stores that they've already just lost. There's definitely no reason you can't do things like chopped up mice for these guys as well. I've definitely done my fair share of chopped up fuzzy and pinky mice in the past. Where I find these guys struggle a little bit though is the fur content, and they don't really process the fur too well, so that either comes out the other end or they can actually end up vomiting it up at some stages too, like a little fur ball. So just take that into consideration. I probably wouldn't be kind of using like very furry animals, just like a light fuzz on a mouse or something like that is probably the better option. So these books that I recommended earlier, like these Danny Brown books, they do actually have guides on how to breed things like your cockroaches, your woodies, for example, and your crickets and things like that in there. I have actually also done my own how to breed crickets video, which I'll link in the description down below. And I will put a link down there to Varanibae's wood roach video, because I'm not going to bother making a wood roach breeding video because that thing is amazing and he deserves to have his link down there for sure. because that video in particular will help you 100%. So if you want to breed cockroaches or wood roaches in particular, that'll work for that. I think it also works for dubia roaches as well to a degree. So I know it's specifically for woodies, but you could relate a lot of that to dubias, I believe. So take that with a grain of salt. I haven't watched the video in a while. But yeah, that would be a great video to go and check out if you want to do roaches. So I will just say that there's going to be a lot of videos that I reference in this video, and they're either going to be myself or they might be from some other people as well. And I'm going to link all of those in the description down below, and I'll put a little thing up here, like a little card that kind of says, you know, link in the description or whatever when I refer to any videos or I overlay any images or anything like that. I'll put that up here, and I'll make sure that I link everything properly in the description down below. So if you want to go and see herping videos where I found these goannas, or food item videos, or, you know, past videos that I've referenced, that, you know, anything that's down there, it'll be down in the description below. So essentially these guys are going to be a very seasonal animal to breed. They will generally lay a clutch or two, potentially 3 in a year, depending on how well you've kind of got them dialed in and set up. They are a great little monitor to breed, and I highly recommend giving it a crack if you want to. That being said, you just want to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row and everything's kind of going nice and smoothly before you punish your female too much, because it's a lot of wear and tear on that poor girl. And if you're not looking after her correctly, you can actually cause her a bit of mischief, and I have experienced that myself in the past. What I would recommend is you get that female to a nice adult size, a comfortable weight, so she can actually bear eggs comfortably. She will naturally want to reproduce if she's got a male present with her. She might even want to produce some eggs even without a male present with her. But that being said, you can actually slow down their reproductive rate by keeping the girls a little bit lean and not kind of giving her the over stores of fat to be able to produce a lot of egg yolk and stuff like that inside of the eggs inside of her. So, you know, you can, if she has laid one clutch, for example, you can actually slow down the feeding afterwards so she doesn't keep producing lots of babies. And depending on the actual animal, that can actually be to your benefit to have a slower year and then potentially ramp it up the next year when she's a bit bigger, a bit more experienced, etc. So take that into consideration when you're starting your girls up, especially for first-time breeders that are kind of getting into Gillens monitor breeding. You may want to consider that rather than going too fast too soon, because you can actually burn out a girl real quick. And I have experienced it with 1 or 2 girls that I have lost over the years for that same sort of reason. So these guys being seasonal breeders, generally after a cool down period, you want to start ramping your heat lights and things like that up in the enclosure to simulate spring coming. Naturally, if you're kind of going with your seasons in your location, they should be able to feel kind of like ambient temperatures and things rising, but it's good to be able to simulate that inside of their enclosure as well. Once you start simulating that spring boost, essentially you want to be able to do the same thing with food. So food cycling is a thing with these animals where essentially coming into winter, I'm slowing the food right down to the point where I'm not giving them any. And then come spring, as things are starting to warm back up, you're starting to introduce more food more often, and into the peak of summer where essentially you're giving them a lot of food. Now, peak summer, I'm probably giving these guys 3 feeds a week, maybe 4. That being said, during the middle of the winter, in that cool down period, I'll give them a couple of months where I don't feed them at all. Even to the case of sometimes it might be 3 or 4 months. It just depends on what their season's doing, what the animals are showing me. If the animals are active, I'll be feeding. If the animals are dormant, I am not feeding them within. So with that being said, your females will want to actually probably look for a nest box during this time if they're becoming reproductive. And what I'd suggest is actually checking out one of my videos where I made fake termite mound nest boxes that facade over essentially like a cereal container. They've been really effective for myself, and they may work for you too. Obviously, I like the aesthetics in my enclosure, so they're not entirely necessary. But that being said, the nest box inside is probably something that you could replicate in some form of variety. In the wild, I'm actually a little bit skeptical as to whether they use termite mounds at all. For me, this is just a particular sort of aesthetic thing that I've set up. But I believe that they potentially might be using essentially termite infested logs, where essentially they're inside of a hollow log and they're actually able to nest into that. One of my friends actually spotted a Gillens monitor by himself when he was in a particular area that was heavily gravid at the time, and she was in a log covered in dust. And then when he went to return to the area too, that log seemed to be kind of packed in and she was nowhere to be seen. So he was a little bit cluey and thought that female might actually be nesting in that actual log using the termite dust inside the log, that kind of red termite dust that they generate. It is in my future plans to be able to try to replicate that inside of a box like this. but I have a feeling I might need a bigger enclosure for what I want to try out. But potentially one day that might be a bit of a goal to kind of strive towards. These particular nest boxes that I have, like the actual cereal container, are roughly probably about 30-35 centimeters tall, about 20 odd centimeters wide, maybe 25 centimeters wide, and they're only about 10 centimeters wide, so they're not a really big box. These animals are able to get into them easily and nest in there quite comfortably, and they've now done it for a few seasons, and they've been quite reproductive doing it. It's actually probably been my best time doing it in these sorts of egg boxes versus some of the other styles that are out there. Generally, I'm not adding any heat to these nest boxes in particular, because the ambient temperature of where I've placed the lights in the enclosure tend to keep them at the right temperature at the right time of year. I'm kind of aiming for those really high 20s in the nest box, so kind of like your 28, 29 mark. That seems to be a bit of a magic point for these particular boxes, for these girls to be comfortable going and laying in there. I'm either using a bit of a mix of sand and coir peat, as to probably like a 3-part sand to 1 coir peat type mix, just to kind of keep that a little bit humid inside of that nest box there. And every now and then I kind of top it up with a little bit of water that will residually go down towards the bottom, so the bottom of the box will be wetter and cooler, and the top of the box will be drier and warmer, and then the girl can kind of go up and down the box, find that perfect gradient of where she's comfortable, lay the eggs there, and call it a day. Okay, so once you've found that your female's actually laid some eggs, what are you going to do now? Well, you'd like to have an incubator set up if you're going to do this properly. Preferably you want something that's actually a little bit more reliable than, say, like a really, really cheap chicken incubator or something like that might not work so crash hot for these guys. There are some commercially available incubators out there that can be a little bit iffy too, or you could just make your own incubator like a lot of people do. A lot of people use things like wine coolers and such, and use like heat tape or heat cord and thermostats and PC fans and stuff like that to essentially make an incubator, which works perfectly fine. Myself, I've actually got a really old incubator that's probably 15 or so years old. It's a Kamani reptile incubator, and it's been rock solid ever since I bought it. I'm lucky enough that I've had this thing going for probably 10 or 11 years myself, and I've never had a problem with it. My incubator is actually dialed into 27.5 degrees Celsius. That being said, inside of the actual nest, or the incubation tub that I'm using, tends to get a little bit warmer than that depending on how the eggs are cooking. It kind of tends to be about more like 29 to 29.5 degrees Celsius in my experience inside of those actual incubation tubs. Now, I'm quite a fan of these sorts of like little egg tray tubs. Some people will see them all over online and stuff like that. For us, we had them from Ironbark Pets, I believe it was. Rob was bringing these in for a long period of time and using those. Some people will use perlite in them, some people will use water crystals in them. I've done both of that. I now just pretty much stick to the overwater method with these guys. I think the biggest trouble that some people have with the overwater method is sometimes the eggs end up too big too soon, like they're taking on too much moisture. So I tend to kind of limit the amount of moisture that's inside of the containers, and I tend to kind of poke a couple of breathing holes into the container too, generally one on top and one just above the waterline, just so that there's a little bit of CO2 exchange inside of that enclosure or that little tub. And it also means that they're not pressurized. So if I want to kind of like open up the tub and vent it out, or wave some fresh air through there, which I do generally do on a weekly basis, then I have that opportunity to do that without the threat of potentially having the eggs explode, which I have experienced many years ago with Aki eggs, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. It's not a very common thing for that to happen, but it is a potential thing to happen if it is like a very pressurized tub. The eggs are at one pressure, the outside air is at another pressure. It can change things, so just be aware of that. So these eggs are going to take a little while to cook. In my experience, it's generally about 100 to 105 or 110 days in that sort of realm there. And I do find that I try to like flush out the egg containers at least once a week towards like the back half of incubation. So all I mean is like crack the lid, wave a couple of fresh bits of air over the top, if you will, put the lid back down, put them in the incubation tub, check that there's enough moisture in the tub, and go from there. This has essentially stopped me getting full-term death. For quite a while I was experiencing full-term death in monitors, where essentially the monitor was perfectly formed inside of the egg, but they just didn't hatch. Now, it could be a couple of reasons there. Potentially that goanna didn't actually form an egg tooth to slip the egg, but there's also the potential that it essentially suffocated right towards the end because it wasn't getting enough fresh oxygen in the container to be able to prolong it. So it's just a little habit that I've picked up now, and I just roll with it. It seems to be working, so I'm not going to fix what's not broken. What you will find is your females will generally want to lay about another 4 to 6 weeks after they've just had that clutch. So if they are going to do multiple clutches in that season, then generally that kind of like month, or just after a month mark, you'll probably find that she's ready for another clutch in that sort of period of time. So just make sure you look at your females, look for things like your belly sagging when they're kind of like hanging onto branches and hanging their belly off because they're really uncomfortably gravid. You know, look for those sorts of traits. That's a good indication to say that your female's holding eggs, or you know, she's getting ready to potentially lay another clutch. So your little goannas have just started hatching and it's all happy days. So from here, what do? So my experience is to basically either leave them in that particular incubation tub or move them into something that's slightly larger but keep them inside of the incubator for a few days. And the reason I do this is basically just so that we can make sure that they've absorbed all their egg yolk. Any umbilical scarring has had the opportunity to heal up. You know, they're just kind of okay in that sort of tub. So sometimes I leave them in the egg box itself with a little incubation tub, or I might put them in a slightly larger container that contains a bit of moist paper towel in there. It's up to you how you want to do it. I just kind of like to put them in a slightly larger tub if they're going to be in there for a few days, just to give them a bit more room to kind of stretch around. So after those few days have kind of been and gone, I like to set them up in essentially like my bare bones basic hatchling tank. And it is really, really simple, and it's just what works for me. So again, I'm not going to fix what's not broken. Basically, it is a 50 or 60 litre plastic tub, which you could get from pretty much any home store or hardware store. And over the top of it, I put a UVB tube. Again, the same sort of output as what the parents are getting, a 10% or higher. And then I also have a hanging incandescent globe above that. The only difference is I don't really bother with the LED lights just at this point. It's not 100% needed, and I just don't want to overheat the boxes too. So similar to the parents, we're trying to hit about 45 to 55 degrees Celsius at the hot basking spot, and then from there, kind of like your high 20s to early 30s at kind of like the cool end of the enclosure for that period of time. Inside of the tubs, I just use plain eucalyptus mulch. The reason I use mulch over sand with the hatchlings is essentially the mulch retains a lot more humidity, which for little lizards is very important because they tend to dehydrate very quickly, especially under warm environments. So I'd recommend using the mulch over sand in this particular circumstance, just because the sand will dry out quicker and it will dry out your lizards quicker. I do offer a shallow water bowl as well at this point, and whenever I top up the water bowl, I do flood that water bowl as well, so then they've got a humidity gradient inside of the tub. I also use flat bits of bark and cork bark and things like that inside of the tub to act as hides. They're simply just flats, like, or very close to flat pieces. Even tiles would work in this circumstance. I used to use a lot of tiles with ackies and things. Just something they can wedge under, feel secure, and it stays low to the ground inside of the tub. For me, that's the most important thing when you're using these tub systems, is essentially keeping it low so you don't have any risk of the lizards actually jumping out of the tubs. People have made some pretty fancy hatchling goanna tub rack systems. Again, Varanibae actually, he's made some cracking ones too, which I'll try to add a link into the video down below. But that being said, for me that's a little bit over the top for what I'm doing. I don't want to have like a permanent setup. I want to be able to kind of collapse these down when I'm not using them, and I value my space. So if I need that space for something temporarily, it's easier to do that than it is to kind of have a permanent structure. I tend to like to use these tubs for the first few months of life, but after that they start getting a little bit too big for them. So then generally I will transition them into things like exoterra enclosures with the same sort of lighting and heating requirements. But just kind of like mimicking more so of what their parents might actually have in the enclosures. So things like your hollow tubes, your bark tubes and stuff like that, just on a smaller scale. Things like a 60 by 45 by 45 exoterra work really well, and you can kind of ramp things up from there as the animal grows bigger. I pretty much treat these animals exactly the same as their parents as far as diet's concerned. It is honestly like 90% bugs at this young age in particular, and then 10% maybe some fattier items just to keep the weight on top of the animals. Pretty much the care will just transition on through different sizes of enclosures right up to where the adults go to from there. And it's pretty easy to look after these animals. They pretty much come out of the eggs looking for food. Particularly, probably the best thing to feed them, I find, when they're like a newly hatched animal, is just small crickets. And I like to dust them with a lot of calcium and vitamin powders, just as you should for any animal that's essentially needing those vitamin requirements. But that being said, I find that they particularly love like a very visible white cricket running around their enclosure when they're a newly hatched animal. That tends to get them eating quicker than like roaches or any other sorts of meaty foods, in my opinion. I think that that's probably the easiest thing to get them onto. It also gets them cued into like watching for something running around inside of their enclosure and, you know, how to go about their way eating it. Yeah, it seems to just kind of trigger those feeding responses really easily. Well guys, I hope this has been a really informative sort of video for you, but I think I'm going to leave it there for this one. If you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate to pop them down below. I will try to touch on everything in this video, but if not, if I've missed anything, I'm more than welcome to try to answer some questions down below for you as well. And I hope that if you guys are giving the Pygmy Mulga Monitor a go at home, that this is a really helpful little bit of information. Potentially like my last video too with the Pygmy Mulga Monitor care, you know, I might probably update this one again in another 5 years or so. These guys have been a part of my life for a long time now, and I can't see them going anywhere. I've literally lived and breathed these animals for a fair while. And yeah, I get a real solid kick out of them as far as a dwarf monitor goes. So guys, if you did want to support the channel any further, please make sure to go and check me out over on Teespring. You can get yourself some Beach's Scaly Beast merch, especially if you're a Pygmy Mulga Monitor fan. You can get some Gilleni merch over there, or you can check me out over on Patreon as well, where you can get some early access content and a little bit of extra content here and there. And if you don't want to do any of that, that's completely fine. But if you could drop the video a like and a subscribe down below, then that'd be much appreciated. Alrighty guys, thanks so much for the support. Until next time, take it easy, and I'll catch you then.